Hello, my name is Audrey Emran Beardsley. I'm an associate professor at Arizona State University in the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. I am the fortunate host of a show titled Inside the Academy, and today we are interviewing Dr. Catherine Snow at Harvard University. Welcome, Dr. Snow. We are going to start with the show in terms of your personal background, and this piece of the show is called Becoming Catherine. So if you tell us a little bit about where you were born and your early childhood.
Sure. I was born in Toledo, Ohio, Rust Belt city near Lake Erie, and I grew up there, left when I was 16 to go to college at Oberlin on the other side of Ohio near Cleveland.
Okay. And tell us about your brother, John.
My brother, John, who is 7 years older than I, 6.5 years older than I, was actually an intermittent presence in my childhood because he spent his elementary years at a boarding school, oddly enough. This happened, I think, because he had trouble learning to read and my parents didn't know what to do. So they sent him off to a Catholic military school that was 20 miles away or so, where he quickly displayed the entrepreneurial and leadership abilities which have stood him in such good stead ever since. And that maybe that's where he became a right-wing Republican too. I don't know.
Tell us about your experiences as a student in a private school.
So this was a Catholic girls' school that I went to, run by the Ursuline nuns, and it was in those years still actually run and taught by nuns. There aren't any of them left anymore, although the school still exists. The school was not susceptible to fads in education, so it had a pretty strict, old-fashioned approach. I was born just at the end of 1945, so the class I should have been in was actually kind of a baby boomer class, the first post-war large class, but the class before that was the last of the pre-baby boomer classes. So the school actually advanced me 1 year so that I would be part of the small class of kids who were a little bit older than me, rather than part of the big class of the kids who were just my age. And that was I think probably a good idea, because I do remember being quite bored. And then there were also two classes in one room in this school. So third and fourth grade were in one classroom. And the school had a couple of students who were sort of cognitively impaired. And I spent a lot of fourth grade teaching a third grader how to read without any guidance from any teacher about how to do that. But I kind of figured out that one of the things you have to do is you have to take long words and cover up part of them, because she could read syllable by syllable, but she couldn't read complicated words. I think I probably absorbed a fair amount of information about the structure of the English language and the structure of the cognitive processes involved in reading during that time.
So do you think your experiences during that time inspired you to become the educational researcher that you've become?
I would not draw such a direct link, but I think it did stand me in good stead in being able to sound vaguely convincing when talking about language and orthography, even though it was an area in which I never had any formal training.
What type of student did you define yourself as? Were you a strong student? Were you?
Oh, I was the nerd A student, not popular, not athletic, but the one who kids would always go to for help with their homework.
Okay. And then you mentioned before, though, being bored. Was that common?
Yeah, I read a lot of books under the desk.
Okay. And tell us about your diverse languages.
This is a little bit of a myth about my diverse languages. I do find it fun to study languages, and this one of the features of this Ursuline-run school was that they had a couple of French-speaking nuns there. So we did have French from kindergarten on up all the time. So I, had formal instruction in French from the very beginning. And then I I learned Dutch because my first job was in the Netherlands, and I spent several years living there. And I had studied German at college, and then, I decided that it was morally unforgivable to be an American educator without being able to speak Spanish. So I took some time off 20 years ago or so and spent 5 months in Madrid learning Spanish. And then I decided that it was also really useful to have an experience with a different orthography. So I started studying Arabic.
Arabic. Okay. So understanding those languages intermediately well or better?
Dutch very well, Spanish moderately, Arabic pretty low level because I keep not using it.
Sure.
But I can read it.
Okay. How has that informed your research?
For one thing, it just does give you a sense of both on the one hand, the enormity of the task of being dropped in a situation where you don't speak the language, where you are rendered incompetent in that situation, and how helpful it is to have some pre-knowledge of what's going on, that you can decode the language so much better if you know what the topic is, if you've read the book in the language you speak better, if you've had the conversation in English before you have to have it in the new language. So I think it's been a series of personal experiences that have really convinced me of the truth of the marginal, sometimes marginal, but accumulating findings about the value of bilingual education, about the value of bilingual education done right, which of course it often isn't, but the value of recruiting parents and preschool teachers to reinforce children's native language and then to link instruction in English to what they already know in their native language, rather than making it the double task of learning new stuff and learning a new language simultaneously.
Okay, so related to this, tell us about your love of vocabulary.
Well, I love vocabulary because it's sort of the most accessible dimension of language in a way. It's the part of language that teachers immediately understand is important. It's the part where you can play. It's the source of puns. It's the domain where you can display etymology. You can link it to what people think of as a disrupted spelling system and actually display that it's a very, very smart spelling system. But I will say, I think in my own work and in the field in general, I think we've actually overemphasized vocabulary. I think we've pushed the vocabulary message too much, with the result that people particularly in early childhood settings, but also in elementary settings, are kind of thinking of their task as teaching words rather than teaching knowledge and letting the words come from the knowledge domains. I think that the big challenge I see in the middle school students we work with isn't that, I mean, it is, of course, that they don't know a lot of words, but it's that they don't know a lot of anything about a lot of topics you might expect 12-year-olds to at least have heard of, at least be able to start to talk about a little bit, whether they're using all the right words to talk about those topics or not. So I'd really love to shift the conversation from vocabulary to and the 30 million word gap, for example, to the knowledge gap. I think it's an Encyclopedia Britannica worth of knowledge that differentiates kids from middle-class families and those from less privileged families. All of the things we do with our kids, trips to the science museum, trips to the zoo, trips to the beach, trips to the mountains, dinner table conversations about what's happening in the news, sitting down and letting them participate in everything from making shopping lists to reading recipes to making family budgets. All of that opens up domains of knowledge that many children just don't have access to. And then, of course, they don't have the words that go with those domains of knowledge.